Hello guys, so welcome to our first lesson on Introduction to Python. Again, in this channel we talked about the fact that we're going to be talking about different things. See, we're going to be talking about data analysis with Python, learning Python for data science, and of course learning Python with statistics. Right, so we're gonna kick off with learning Python for data science. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to walk you guys through introductory lessons in Python. I think it's crucial that you know how to write Python, because it's going to help you going down the line when trying to solve real world problems using data science. Now, to make this important, or for this to become crucial in your data science journey, it is important that you pick up Python in a very relatable way. Now you have to understand why you're writing Python in the first place and why Python is a part and parcel of this journey. The first thing I would even want to do is to explain what Python in itself is. So, but first, before we do that, we're going to set our notebooks up so that it looks really important for what we're doing. So I'm going to, you can see what I did here. I moved to Markdown so that I could create like a document of a sort, so that I have a notebook. So I use the hash sign. So with the first hash sign, it makes you create a header of a sort. So I'm going to call this introduction to Python, right? Now the first thing I'm going to talk about in introduction to Python is I'm going to talk about the idea of documenting your code, because it's an ideal it's an ideal practice, right? That when you are creating things like Python variables, functions, and other kind of names, other kind of identifiers, that it's good you make this creation pretty seamless. If someone's going to read your code, then the person is going to understand what you're doing, or another person who's going to read your code is going to understand what you're all about. Or if you come back a year later to read your code, you're going to understand what you were trying to do in the first place. So that's the first part. So we're going to talk about that, but of course I'm going to give an intro to Python itself. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this here. Then here I'm going to use this hash symbol to talk about a few things that we'll be doing. So let's make this 2 hash symbols. No, let's make it 3. Then I'll call this documentation. That's what it's going to be about. This first lesson is going to be about documentation, right? So, and I'm going to again make this a Markdown, so you see how simple that is. And I come here and I put numbers. So first thing I'm going to talk about comments, right? I'm going to talk about, second I'm going to talk about PEP 8. PEP 8 is a style guide, right? Because there's going to be a lot of reading that is it's needed. So it's called, this is style guide. It's a Python style guide. So it's a style guide. We're going to talk about that. Let me make this a capital letter, right? We're going to talk about style guide. Also, what are we going to talk about again? I'm also going to talk about reading documentation. So there's, Python has documentation. So we're going to talk about reading Python documentation. We're not going to do all this in this video, but we're just going to do an introductory thing to it. So we're just going to start off, and so that means the preceding videos are going to have all this in them. So so we're going to have reading Python docs. Yeah, we're going to be looking at Python documentation. So we look at that, we'll write some code, and we'll look at what the documentation looks like. So it makes a lot of sense, right? So so that's like basically that. So if there's any additional stuff, I'll put that out there. So it's basically documentation, looking at all this, right? Now, it's an interesting thing for us to understand why we are writing code. So we're writing Python because we are trying to abstract real world, features, real world things, and make them Python objects, right? So when you abstract real world stuff and make them Python objects, then that makes a lot of sense, right? Now, again, we're trying to solve real world problems, so we're going to take everything we find in the world and we're going to bring it into our environment here, right? Say, for instance, we think of the fact that we want to say just simple stuff. We want to create an arithmetic, like say this, an arithmetic abstraction. I'll call that. An abstraction is just trying to take a real world stuff and then try to bring it into this kind of environment. So here we're probably going to call this add, then then inside we're going to say 6 plus 9, right? So again, now we have a real world abstraction, but we don't just put this like this and just leave it. When somebody sees this code in future, they're going to be like, okay, what does this mean? But an interesting thing to it is when we come to the side and then we introduce a comment. So this is a comment. So you introduce a comment, and here we say assigning a what I call it, a value to add. Maybe in brackets you write an addition of 6 plus 9. So again, I know this looks a whole lot, right? But it doesn't look as if it's all cute. But the idea here is when somebody reads this, they probably know what the hell this is all about. Of course, this looks all clunky and all because I had to put this, but I could take this out. Just leave this here. Then maybe on the top here, I write this. Right, so you see that? So here we are creating an arithmetic abstraction. I had to call it that. So now you see that we've done this. So now it's important that when you write code, you start from the very beginning, to practice documentation like this, like using your comment. So this basically is basically a comment. So so it's a comment. Really simple stuff. You see it a lot when you go out to pick up people's codes, and you see that they put comments to it. When you find people's code without, or developers who have put out codes out there without comments, it's pretty hard to understand what they're doing, except they put up some form of a document to it before sharing the code base, right? And so again, comments are highly recommended, especially when your code starts to become complex and not very easy to understand at the first time you look at it. Yeah. So another thing that you can do with comments is you can, use comments. So I have now, if I write print, which is a function that lets you print out whatever you've done. Sometimes you probably don't want the code to run, so you could want to comment out. Right, so here we created a comment, or not just created a comment. Yeah, we did. We created a comment. Then here we comment out. Now you probably don't want this code to run. An ideal thing to do when you don't want a code to run is to comment code out. So here, see that? So here we have, again, commented out this code. So yeah, that's basically that. So when you run this, you can see that it's now ignored. The Python interpreter has ignored that code. So it's truly important to pick up stuff like this. It makes it a lot easier to share your code and then make some descriptions to it. Now, one last part of what I want to share is that there's some best practices for writing comments. And again, sometimes you can also see me break this rule. So, but it's ideal, quote unquote, to write comments in a way that makes it easy for people to understand what you're doing. Say I create a variable and I call this age, right? And inside I put 40, and on the side I say, say average age, or I just say assigning, let me just make it simple, assigning a value to, assigning an age value to age, right? Now you see that it's on the side here, so when somebody's reading your code, they probably know, oh, okay, this is what this is all about. But sometimes we find out that I might simply pick this guy just as is, and then when I keep it here, or when I put it here, so let's take this out, I probably will do something like this. This is often like really popular, and you put it on top. Now, of course, you've put it out here, but sometimes some reader elsewhere will probably assume that this is you given the topic. So that could happen, right? So sometimes putting it on the side makes it pretty easier. So you see, so when you put it on the side, it is. In some literature, so they're going to call this bad commenting. So just, bear that in mind. And sometimes I'm going to make mistakes in this my videos when I'm writing comments, but just forgive me because I'm trying to teach something. But I'll keep it in mind not to make this mistake, so I don't become a hypocrite while I'm teaching this. So yeah, so first things first, recap, introduction to Python. Python is an object-oriented programming language, and we're trying to abstract real-world features, things, values, and then bringing it in here into the environment. There's a Python interpreter in every Python code or Python environment, and the Python interpreter helps to read your code and bring them out. Right, so, and here we talked about comments, and as a part of an idea of documentation, and we talked about that. So we try to write a few types of comments that help you, put your codes together at first. We're just going to do this before we start writing code proper. So in the next video, we're going to talk about PEP 8, and then hopefully, if time allows, we're going to also talk about reading Python documentation, which is really an important aspect of learning how to write code. So yeah, if there's anything, if there's any issue, just drop a comment in the comment section, and let me know what you think, and then I'll try to help you guys out with that. Later.